Welcome to On The Money Line, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsom, and I'm here to break down UFC Vegas 92, which goes down this weekend at the Apex, again in Vegas. So it's another one of these small cage events with no crowd. And yeah, like I say, everybody knows, or at least everybody that listens week in, week out knows my opinion on this. I don't mind an odd Apex event. I do think, you get something a little bit different in regards to being able to hear the coaches. The strikes are a little bit louder, and, the small cage forces more action as well. But like I say, it's nice for the UFC to be on the road as well. I have also read reports this morning that I think the UFC are axing the Apex events, which, again, I'm not sure, how true that is, but, really interesting to read that. Obviously, if they do that, it means they're going to be on the road every single week, which, again, is going to be great for the UFC to get back to that. Obviously, the Apex was brought in initially for COVID, and it did a fucking phenomenal job when COVID was about, because the UFC did something that no other sport on the entire planet was doing, and that's remained active, and that was because of the Apex. So you've got to appreciate that side of it as well. However, digressing, because we do have a card to break down this weekend. Now, from a name perspective, it's not massively up there. Obviously, we've got a veteran and an absolute legend in the main event. But outside of that, yeah, it's not a card that, if I'm being honest, excites me too much. But that does more often than not lead to the individual fights being phenomenal on the night. But look, we're coming off a card last weekend as well, which, wasn't that great, again, from a pre-fight perspective, from a name perspective. And then we've got this card, which is a little bit of the same, but that normally means that something great is coming up. And obviously we've got UFC 302, which goes down next weekend, Makhachev and Poirier. So obviously these are just the sort of filler events ready for that big pay-per-view. And like I say, sometimes these events just prove to be absolutely wild, because fighters, look, a commentator said this before as well, and I absolutely agree. I can't remember which commentator said this in the UFC, but these are the cards that, you should always be watching, because your future champions, your future prospects, your future world-class fighters are all going to be on these sort of cards before they make it to that level. So it's, the public and the MMA fans' chance to watch these world-class fighters right at the very beginning of their UFC career. So that always stuck with me. And like I say, even though the card isn't too exciting, again, in my opinion, from a pre-fight perspective, we could be looking at a future champion on one of these cards that we just don't know it yet. And like I say, these individual fights can also prove to be absolutely fire as well. So yeah, that's in a nutshell what we're dealing with. And we've got UFC Vegas 92 to break down. But just before we do, as always, if you're wanting to turn up and tune up those excitement levels for the card, make it a little bit more fun, jump into the action from a betting perspective, then you can do that at MMA Play 365, where you've got all the handicapper advice, which is from myself. You've got written breakdowns, recommended bets, fun parlays that are pre-built for you, parlay options so you can build your own parlays, official bets from myself as well, along with the Baze AI UFC prediction software. Everything is all in one subscription, so you're not having to purchase multiple subscriptions depending on whether you want the handicapper or whether you want the AI. Everything's in one package. Just choose your length, whether it's a next event, so that's just one event, a monthly subscription, which is a recurring subscription, or an annual subscription to pay for the entire 12 months. We've got the options there for different lengths of subscription, so you can choose what works best for you, and that's all at MMAplay365.com. But now let's get into the breakdowns. Let's start with the main event, as we always do. We've got Edson Barboza versus Lerone Murphy. And what's really interesting straight off the bat from Lerone Murphy's perspective is that this is Lerone Murphy's potential first fight where he could go 5 rounds, I believe. If I've researched that correctly, he's definitely not gone 5 rounds before, not at least what I've seen from Topology, whether he's been scheduled for it or not. But this is a legitimate fight where he could potentially go 5 rounds for the first time. So that's a very interesting aspect. It always is as well with these fighters that are stepping into the UFC for the first main event and have that potential of the first 5 rounds. Sometimes it doesn't go all 5. Sometimes, they do 3 well and then start tiring out at the end of the third, and then the championship rounds is what kills them off. So it's always an interesting aspect to look at when you've got these, prospects in the UFC that are fighting in that first main event. And of course, with Lerone Murphy, what doesn't help him here is that he's fighting Edson Barboza in this main event, who has been around for years, who has fought the who's who has fought every single world-class fighter pretty much that's entered this division over the last like 5 to 10 years. And with Barboza, he went 5 rounds last time out and looked fine over 5 rounds as well. So yeah, with Lerone Murphy, there's definitely a contrast here of where he's at to where Barboza's at. Of course, Murphy is closer to his prime, whereas Barboza, I don't believe he's in his prime anymore, but I also don't believe he's close to declining yet either. And you look at that last fight with Barboza and Sodiq Yusuff, it's very similar to what we've got here. Like, Sodiq Yusuff was a prospect, a fighter that the UFC are pushing to a main event to let's see where you're at, and they're doing the exact same thing with Murphy. And actually, Barboza had a really tough first round against Sodiq Yusuff. Sodiq Yusuff obviously packs a ton of power. He hurt Barboza. Potentially, another referee on a different night might have stopped the fight and Yusuff would have got a, round 1 knockout win, which would have been amazing against Barboza. But the referee allowed Barboza to continue to fight, which in my opinion is always the right move. Unless you're out or your hands are physically down and you're not defending yourself. Barboza still had a little bit about him. And I think that was the reason the referee allowed him to continue. And Barboza, what happened, recovered. And look, at first I thought, when I first watched it live, I thought, okay, Sodiq Yusuff has absolutely emptied his gas tank, on Barboza, trying to finish him, throwing like 100 big bombs just to get him out of there. But re-watching it, I actually don't think he did. I'm not saying he wasn't tired out from the burst, but I actually think Sodiq Yusuff was a lot more calm and calculated than, another fighter would have been. And that's the right thing to do. But Barboza recovered. And then once Barboza recovered, he got himself back into the fight. I don't know what was happening with Sodiq Yusuff. Maybe there was a little bit of doubt there that he'd just given Barboza potentially his biggest shots. That was his opportunity and it didn't happen. But Barboza very slowly and methodically started to take over the fight. And that shows the veteran qualities that you're getting with these, veterans that aren't declined yet, that still have something about them. Jose Aldo, just a couple of weeks ago against Jonathan Martinez. Martinez wasn't doing anything wrong as a fighter. He was a solid fighter. He was an improving fighter, dangerous fighter, on a win streak. And he went in there with Aldo and got absolutely pieced up. So, look, like I said, there's still something about these Brazilian veterans, or not just Brazilian, just veterans in general that have been around the block, that have fought the best in the world. And I did mention that Barboza had fought the best in the world and, all the world-class fighters and elite fighters over the years. In this division, I actually meant in the lightweight division. Of course, he's dropped down to featherweight, but still, like, the experience that Barboza has, and the fact, again, I've just mentioned that he came down in weight to featherweight a few fights ago. He's big, he's strong for the division. But then, like, on the other side, we've got Lerone Murphy. He's a fighter that's on his way up. He's unbeaten as well. I kind of feel that he did lose that Gabriel Santos fight, though I thought it at the time when he fought. I actually had a bet on Santos, so maybe that played a factor into it. It doesn't normally, but I can always appreciate that certain variables can take place. However, when I rewatched it with no bias, I still don't think he won that fight. So, although he is unbeaten, I don't think he should be. However, that doesn't take away the fact that Murphy is a very good fighter. He's got a very well-rounded style. He's got good striking. He's going to have youth on his side here, probably a bit of power as well. Maybe the durability factor goes to Murphy also. And then he can wrestle and he can grapple. But the issue that I have with Lerone Murphy in this fight is he's not a specialist in one specific area. And I kind of feel that if you're going to beat Edson Barboza, even at this stage in your career, you've got to be a specialist somewhere. Like, you look at a Bryce Mitchell, for example. Bryce Mitchell's specialist wrestling and grappling. Striking not all there, but the wrestling and grappling, when I say striking not all there, I mean compared to Barboza. But the wrestling and grappling is where he was a specialist, and that's where he got the job done against Barboza. I think that, you look at Giga Chikadze, specialist striker. Yes, it takes a certain level of striker to be better than Barboza striking, but a specialist nonetheless. So I kind of feel you've got to be elite in one specific aspect of MMA to be able to beat Barboza, and I don't think Murphy is. He's a good striker, he's a good wrestler, he's a good grappler, but he's not a what we'd categorize as an absolute specialist in one of those areas. So I do think that he's going to be met with Barboza here in a situation where he's fighting, or potentially fighting, 5 rounds for the first time, main event for the first time. He's got a veteran and a legend in front of him with all the experience in the world. Barboza's fought and beaten a better level of opponent than Lerone Murphy. Even, you might want to argue, last time out against Sodiq Yusuff. Sodiq Yusuff versus Lerone Murphy is going to be a very competitive fight that, without, obviously, I've not looked into this because the fight's not there. I've not taped it, but I would pre-tape. I would probably favour Sodiq Yusuff in that fight against Lerone Murphy. So you've got, even, you want to argue that Barboza's last win over 5 rounds was against a better quality opponent who's also young, who's also hungry, and who's also more dangerous than Lerone Murphy. So yeah, look, I think that I wouldn't be shocked if Lerone Murphy won this fight. Like I say, he's unbeaten and he does have this good all-round style, but I kind of think it's another one of these fights where, this, younger prospect who's rising in the UFC is going to be met with the veteran and the legend over 5 rounds in a situation he hasn't been dealt with before, and, generally struggles. And if Lerone Murphy doesn't hurt Barboza, man, Barboza is lethal. Like, I don't even think Sodiq Yusuff got the lethal Barboza because Barboza was hurt early. It probably still affected him over the following 4 rounds. But if Murphy doesn't hurt Barboza, then I think Barboza's going to tee off here. So for all the reasons that I've mentioned, I'm picking Edson Barboza to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got an interesting fight stylistically. We've got Khaos Williams versus Carlston Harris in the co-main event. And like I said, it's pretty intriguing, this fight, and it's one that I've been going backwards and forwards on because I can legitimately see and make a case for both fighters here. So look, from Khaos Williams' perspective, he's a lot like what we had with Buckley last weekend. He's, a powerhouse for the division, physically built, very muscular, strong, comes forward, wings bombs, has got a ton of power. You just don't want to get caught with one of the hooks in the combinations because, the likelihood is you're going to be hitting the canvas. And then on the flip side, you've got Carlston Harris, who is absolutely nowhere near as technical as what Khaos Williams is. I actually think some of the striking that Harris throws is, very, very untechnical at this level in the UFC. However, the flip side to that is it's more of an awkward style, and that can be difficult for a fighter to deal with. It's like some poker players will say that they hate playing against people that aren't experienced playing poker because they're harder to read, and the same thing can be said for a fighter that's so unorthodox and so untechnical with the striking that it can be hard to deal with because he's going to be throwing strikes that you're not used to throwing, and you're not used to training and drilling to defend. So that's what you've got with Carlston Harris. But with that being said as well, he does pack power in these punches that he throws, even if they are, the odd donkey punch in there or punches from the hips. And yeah, it's a real awkward style what Carlston Harris has. But with Carlston Harris, he's got a very physical nature about him. Like Khaos Williams, when you look at both these fighters side by side, you're going to assume that Khaos Williams is stronger, but I'm not convinced that he is going to be stronger than Harris. Harris has got this weird deceptive power and strength in regards to, just being able to pin his opponents up in the clinch and, being able to sort of lean on them a little bit, drain the cardio. And his ground game is also really good as well. So I think if he can get Khaos Williams on his back, I think Harris is going to have a lot of success here. And of course, on the flip side, if Khaos Williams is constantly punching himself into the clinch, dips his head a little bit low, Carlston Harris has got a really nasty front choke game, Darce chokes, anaconda chokes, snap downs. He's got a very, very dangerous submission game from those front chokes. Khaos Williams cannot give him his neck at any point in this fight because Harris will wrap it up. And that's your stylistic clash. Like, I think Williams has got the power edge here. Carlston Harris, can he be hit defensively? Yes. And again, that's why Khaos Williams is the favourite in this fight. I think a lot of people are just seeing that Khaos Williams is going to be able to land on Harris, and with the power that he possesses, you put 2 and 2 together and get 4. But like I said, you can't ignore the fact that Harris has got this weird striking game as well. And you look at the Jared Gooden fight, When Carlston Harris fought Jared Gooden I think was like 6 or 7 pounds heavier than him. He missed weight in a big way to the point where I'm surprised the commission even allowed the fight to happen. But even prior to the weight miss, Jared Gooden's a powerful striker. That's one of his biggest traits as a fighter. His striking's decent and he's got power behind it. Carlston Harris took all that and ended up taking over the fight. Yes, Gooden, gassed out. We don't know what happened with the weight cut, but Harris dealt with a much, much bigger, much more powerful striker in Jared Gooden and survived and won the fight. Then you look at Jeremiah Wells. Look, Jeremiah Wells isn't as big as Khaos Williams, but the dude is about as explosive as it can possibly get. He packs a ton of power, one-punch knockout power. Carlston Harris dealt with that. Yes, he was losing the fight up until he found the finish, but he wasn't losing the fight because he was struggling to deal with the strike, and he was losing the fight because Jeremiah Wells was pinning him up and taking him down. And like I say, Wells has got a wrestling and grappling game that Khaos Williams doesn't have. So where I do absolutely see the Khaos Williams side of, him coming forwards, burst of attacks, putting Harris on the back foot, getting Harris a little bit hesitant of, what's coming at him. I do think Khaos Williams can get at Carlston Harris in that way and knock him out. But I think if Harris can just clinch up regularly, put Khaos Williams' back against the cage, drain the gas tank a little bit of Williams, get the lactic acid flowing through his muscles, get the fight down to the mat, I think Harris has got a real path to victory here. So I'm actually going to side with Harris. And the reason why is because, like I said, I can come down on both sides of the fence here, but I don't think Harris is going to be massively outmatched on the feet. He's just got to mind his P's and Q's from a defensive perspective. But where I do think the biggest gap in skill is here is if Harris can get on top of Williams. If Harris takes Williams down, I do think Williams will have trouble, getting back up to his feet. Maybe not initially. A lot of these UFC level fighters have got a get up or two in them initially. But if Harris does keep on it and takes him down, again, we haven't seen too much of Williams on his back, but you look at the Michel Pereira fight. Michel Pereira got him down once, Williams did a decent job, but the second time Pereira got him down, he got him down in guard, and at that point, even though he wasn't on his back for too long before the round ended, you didn't see Williams trying to get on a hip. He was flat on both shoulders, and yeah, I just didn't like what I saw in that brief moment. I do think there's something Carlston Harris can get at there with Williams. So for those reasons, I'm picking Carlston Harris to win this fight. And speaking of the wrestling and grappling, in the next fight, we've got Ramiz Brahimaj versus Themba Gorimbo. And this is, again, a real intriguing fight for a different reason than the last fight, because I do think that both fighters, whether, I was going to say whether they strike or not, obviously all fights start standing, so there is going to be an element of striking here, but the longer the fight plays out, I think the more relevant the wrestling and grappling is going to be, because that's where both fighters like to be. You look at Gorimbo, again, in his UFC fights, he loves to shoot in quite early. Doesn't really set the takedown attempts up, but he will be relentless. He's got some deceptive power as well. You can see that in the power of his strikes. And again, that is just a bit of a gauge of the power that, an athlete possesses, because although he doesn't have a huge striking background, like I say, he dropped Takashi Sato, he knocked out Pete Rodrigues pretty badly, so he's got some power behind him. But going back to the wrestling, he'll be relentless there. He'll try and get his opponents down, and once his opponent's down, he can do a good job of blanketing. So, getting a good position, staying there, landing just enough strikes for the referee not to stand them back up. But the issue that I've got is Gorimbo only seems to be able to get away with this when either A, he's fighting a fighter that's not quite on his level in regards to wrestling and grappling, or he's just fighting a fighter that's not on his level in general. And you look at Pete Rodrigues, I don't think he's a UFC caliber fighter, and Gorimbo dealt with him. Takashi Sato, 4-fight losing streak, I don't think he's even with the UFC anymore. And Gorimbo had a really good time against him, but that's because Takashi Sato had massive holes in his wrestling and grappling, and Gorimbo exposed it. When Gorimbo did fight someone that was able to match something in regards to the wrestling and grappling was AJ Fletcher. And yes, Gorimbo got a couple of takedowns, but AJ Fletcher ended up taking over the fight. He reversed positions and he ended up beating Gorimbo by submission. Now you've got Ramiz Brahimaj. So Ramiz Brahimaj is naturally a wrestler and grappler. Is he levels above Gorimbo as a fighter? No, he's not. I think they're very well matched in regards to where they're currently at in their MMA careers in the UFC. I think that they're on the same level. You wouldn't say either fighter's above either fighter here, which makes me have some concerns for Gorimbo, because Brahimaj, from a grappling perspective, well, that's where his game lies. Like, he is a grappler. He's a very good grappler as well, competes in grappling tournaments. So where Gorimbo was getting reversed by AJ Fletcher and where Gorimbo was submitted by AJ Fletcher, I think Brahimaj is a much better grappling version of AJ Fletcher. Then when you look at the wrestling, look, Brahimaj is not a beast wrestler, but he sets his takedowns up a little bit better than what Gorimbo does. He chain wrestles a little bit better. He also trains with Kyle Crutchmer as well, who, formerly was with AKA, with Velasquez, DC, Habib. Now he's with Fortis MMA. He's a former NCAA D1 wrestler. So you know that Brahimaj is going to have a level of wrestling preparation in this fight as well. I just think it's going to be a really close fight, and I know I've spent a lot of time on Brahimaj, but look, the early moments in this fight, I think Gorimbo's going to be better. I think Brahimaj might have to sort of weather a little bit of a relentless storm here, not from a danger perspective, but a Gorimbo that's wanting to stick to him. But even still, when that fight hits the mat, I like Brahimaj to scramble and get the better positions here. I think that Gorimbo's got a really tough style for a certain either level of opponent or type of opponent, and I just don't think Brahimaj is the type of opponent that Gorimbo's going to go in there and be successful against wrestling and grappling for the course of the fight. Like I say, I think the early moments are going to be tough for Brahimaj, that he's going to have a relentless Gorimbo to deal with, but I think he can get through it. And look, I know a lot of people will reference the Court McGee fight, but McGee had that old man strength. He had a different type of physical approach to that fight with Brahimaj. And, Court McGee's got a wrestling and grappling background. He's a veteran himself. I don't think you can compare the two. I think Brahimaj is going to have some success here. Again, the other side to this is when Gorimbo's met with a little bit of resistance with the wrestling and grappling, his cardio can start to drop a little bit as well. So again, I'm thinking maybe the longer the fight goes on, if Gorimbo is relentless and Brahimaj is making Gorimbo work hard, I just think that it's a close fight. Definitely Brahimaj's got to be aware of that relentless approach early on, but I think he can overcome that. And I believe that Brahimaj's the better wrestler and grappler in a fight that's probably going to be determined by wrestling and grappling. So for those reasons, I'm picking Ramiz Brahimaj to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Adrian Yanez versus Vinicius Salvador. This should be a fun fight for as long as it lasts. And look, I hate to break a fight down in this way or, use phrases like this, but I kind of feel like it's a bit of a build-up fight for Adrian Yanez, if I'm being honest. Look, he's a fighter that was very highly regarded, prospect. He was beating some really good fighters, obviously coming off that bad loss against Jonathan Martinez, where Martinez just completely blew his leg to bits, didn't really have a chance to get going. I think this is a little bit of a reset, rebuild fight for Yanez against Salvador. And look, even with that being said, the early moments in this fight is not going to be Yanez's friend, because we have seen that Vinicius Salvador can come out fast, he can come out hard. He doesn't do it in every fight, and maybe I kind of feel like it depends who's in front of him. With Adrian Yanez in front of him, there's no way that Salvador and his team have looked at Adrian Yanez's footage and watched tape on him and don't know that he's dangerous, very, very dangerous, especially whilst he's fresh and his cardio's there. And maybe they've looked at him and think, he can also be got at. You look at what Rob Font did to Adrian Yanez. You look at what Jonathan Martinez did to Adrian Yanez. He can be got at if you get in his face. So I kind of feel that this is the Vinicius Salvador that we're going to see that just comes out straight hard at Yanez and really tries to put volume on him, put power on him, combinations, just absolutely unload on him early on. And if I'm right, this is going to be a really fun fight, especially early on. But the problem is, for as overwhelming as Vinicius Salvador can be to some opponents, I don't think Yanez will be overwhelmed with that. I actually think Yanez would welcome that, because Vinicius Salvador is a bit wild. He's unorthodox as well with his strikes, hands low. Again, that's going to be a problem against Yanez, who's got some real slick boxing with power. But Salvador, like I said, he comes out in those moments, he comes out wild, he comes out hard, everything's winging, looping, full power on everything, and it's just going to leave a lot of openings for Yanez. So I kind of feel that Vinicius Salvador, he's got to pick his poison here, because if he comes out fast and hard, I think that he gives himself a chance, but I think Yanez catches him and knocks him out. However, if Vinicius Salvador doesn't come out fast and hard and tries to go technique for technique with Yanez, Yanez will piece him up. Maybe not get the early knockout, maybe finish him a little bit later on, or just take a dominant decision. So I do think it's tough for Vinicius Salvador, because whichever version of him comes out, I do think he gets beat. It's just if he comes out fast and hard, he at least gives himself that early chance of being able to get Yanez out. So, yeah, it's a tough one for Salvador. I think it's a good fight for Yanez, a good rebuild, reset fight. For those reasons, I'm picking Adrian Yanez to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Angela Hill versus Luana Pinheiro. And I think this is a good and a well-matched fight for both women here. You know, Pinheiro is, again, fighting another one of these fighters that is a bit of a legend in, or not a bit of a legend, absolutely a legend in women's MMA in the UFC. And very similar to the type of fight that she had with Michelle Waterson-Gomez. And this is the thing with Pinheiro, like, she's not taking easy fights at the minute. Obviously, she beat Michelle Waterson-Gomez. I still think that fight could have gone either way. At the time, I thought that Michelle Waterson-Gomez won. I watched it a second time before Pinheiro's last fight. I thought Pinheiro won. I watched it again for this fight. And again, I don't know. Like, it's one of those fights where, you know, you run that exact fight play-by-play 10 times with a different set of 3 judges each time, and you'll get a different result each time. But Michelle Waterson-Gomez, then she fights Amanda Ribas, who she did really well with in round 1. Lost round 2 once Ribas made the correct adjustments, but then she went into round 3 against Ribas, and actually she was on her way to winning that round and winning the fight until she allowed Ribas back up to her feet, because she'd got a good takedown in a close fight with like a couple of minutes left. If she'd stayed on top, she'd have beaten Amanda Ribas. And look what Ribas has gone on to do. You know, she went into a main event against Rose Namajunas, you know, performed well. So even though Pinheiro lost that fight, it just shows you that she's in and around this level. And now we've got Angela Hill, who's another veteran of the sport. And again, I just think it's going to be one of these really close fights, that the volume's really close on either side. Both fighters have the moments. Both fighters are going to win a round. Then there's probably going to be another close round, or maybe a couple of close rounds along the way. And you're going to potentially get to a decision where, you know, it could go either way. So, and maybe you don't know which way it's going to go on that decision. Maybe it's a split decision. So, from the decision side, it's very close. However, if you're looking at a finish, I think Pinheiro's got the finishing upside here. She's got more power. I think she's more aggressive. She can put Angela Hill on the back foot. She's got, you know, high-level jiu-jitsu. She's got a good Brazilian jiu-jitsu top game as well. And like I said, Angela Hill's well-rounded. She's good everywhere. So, look, I do think it's going to be one of these close fights. I think Pinheiro, if there's a finish, it's more likely to be on Pinheiro's side, whether that's striking or grappling. And then if it does go to a decision, yeah, that's when I think it could be really, really close, because, you know, if it's gone to a decision, that means Angela Hill has gotten out of the finishing sort of scenarios against Pinheiro and probably, you know, struck well enough to make this fight close. So, yeah, I think it's a really close fight. But I do think that the youth on Pinheiro's side, the fact that she will be making the developments, the fact that she is going to really close fights with other fighters like Hill, you know, Michelle Waterson-Gomez, I think, is probably a slightly better fighter than Angela Hill. Amanda Ribas is a better fighter than Angela Hill. I know MMA math doesn't work in styles make fights, but Pinheiro's going to very, very close fights with fighters that are, in my opinion, slightly better than Hill at this point. So even though Hill's not going to be easy out, and it is going to be a close fight, I am edging towards Pinheiro slightly. So for those reasons, I'm picking Luana Pinheiro to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Tom Nolan versus Victor Martinez. And I think this is, again, I mentioned it with Adrian Yanez a couple of fights ago, a couple of breakdowns ago, and I kind of think that this is, again, a rebuild, reset fight for Tom Nolan. Tom Nolan came into his UFC debut against Nicholas Motta, I believe. He was a massive favourite, and, you know, everyone expected him to beat Motta, and Motta was, you know, not on the greatest form at that time either. Nolan, massive height, massive reach, massive range advantage, you know, dangerous power. And yeah, Motta managed to get him out there. But this is very, very common with fighters that come out of the Dana White Contender Series with even more hype that they went into the Contender Series with. They come into the first UFC fight against a fighter that's fought a number of times in the UFC at least. They're a massive favourite and they get beat. and then they come into the second fight and then they look like a completely different fighter. They look like the fighter that we were expecting to see on the debut but didn't, and I kind of feel this is where we're at with Tom Nolan. But again, he's a minus 500 favourite, biggest favourite on the card, I believe, and you can understand why. And look, Victor Martinez, I think, I don't want to say he's being thrown to the wolves here, but it kind of feels like that, because when you look at the fight, where does Martinez actually beat Tom Nolan? It's difficult. Yes, he can land a punch and knock him out, but this is going to be a different Tom Nolan. I think he's going to have his head screwed on a little bit more here. He's going to be a little bit smarter, definitely from a defensive perspective. But like I say, he's going to have a big height and reach advantage over Martinez. He's going to have a power advantage. I just think that Nolan is going to be a bit of a nightmare for Martinez. Martinez is going to have to work harder just to get into the range before he can even do anything. So that's going to make Martinez, again, like I say, work harder. Nolan's going to have to work a little bit less, but he's going to have access to striking Martinez and being the better fighter at more ranges on the outside. Even close boxing range, I think Nolan will be okay, because he can, even if he's not okay, he can just engage that little bit further, get into the clinch scenarios, and then the taller, longer fighter is normally the more dangerous fighter in the clinch. Martinez will be close to the hips for any takedowns, but again, it's just not really his game. Martinez is going to have to be there to strike with Nolan, and it's going to be tough because of the height, because of the range, because of the different ranges where Nolan is better in. So yeah, I think it's a real tough fight for Martinez, and I just don't see him getting the job done. For those reasons, I'm picking Tom Nolan to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Oumar Sy versus Antonio Trocoli. So this is really interesting, because, and I actually tweeted something about this the other day. Oumar Sy was supposed to fight Rodolfo Bellato. Now, before I tell you what I'm about to tell you, I would put Rodolfo Bellato and Antonio Trocoli within the same category of, skill set and quality of fighter. Like, if those two fought, I think it'd be a really good fight. I think it would be close. It would be competitive. So I put those two in the same category. Now, Rodolfo Bellato, at least before he pulled out with whatever he pulled out with, I don't know if it was an injury or not, or an illness, but before he pulled out, Rodolfo Bellato was a very, very, very slight favourite with Oumar Sy at around plus 100. Now, this could have, of course, changed on fight weeks where you do get a lot of swinging odds. Fighters can be the odds and the betting lines can stay stagnant until you get to Sunday night or Monday within fight week, and then, odds can change. But Bellato had stayed a very slight favourite against Oumar Sy for quite a while. Now, when Antonio Trocoli steps in against Sy, who again, in my opinion, is a very close type of fighter to Bellato, Oumar Sy opens up a minus 300 favourite, gets steamed to minus 400. It's come down now to around minus 250, but still that is a ridiculously wide betting line when he's fighting a fight. Look, in my opinion, I actually think Trocoli may be a bit of a more difficult fight for Oumar Sy than what it was with Bellato. And I'd have bet Oumar Sy at plus 100 against Bellato, but I think Trocoli is maybe a more difficult opponent stylistically for Sy. Yet he's come in a massive underdog, and I love Oumar Sy's style. I think that he brings something different into the UFC. He's got that pressure wrestling. He's got a real heavy top game. He can make the odd mistake from time to time. That is something that he's got to be really careful of here, because Antonio Trocoli, even though he once fought at welterweight, this dude's huge now. He's been training, I believe, in Vegas or in America for a little bit. His physique's huge. He's going to have the right coaching behind him. He's not where he was previously, and I kind of feel that Trocoli is built himself up, and he always had an interesting style as well. Decent takedowns, good. He's a good, tall, long striker with power. So it's going to be interesting, because Sy will strike for a little bit, and then bang, the takedowns will come. And I think that Sy will dominate a lot of fighters in this division with his style. However, I also think on the flip side to that, when Sy's met with any resistance to this wrestling, I think he could start to really struggle if the takedowns aren't coming as easily as what they'll come in on the regional scene. And or fighters are getting back up straight away once they're taken down, which wasn't happening on the regional scene. I think C might start running out of ideas and the takedowns become desperation ones, and then he's starting to get hit, then he's starting to get tired. And I don't know if Trocoli is going to be able to do this. I kind of think that he's going to get taken down early. If Trocoli's cardio can hold up here and he can make C, I think it's going to be a little bit different. Normally I'll say, look, a fighter might get up once or twice, or a fighter might defend the initial few takedowns, but the longer the wrestler keeps going, the more likely they are to become relentless and start pulling away with the fight. But in this fight, I'm seeing it the opposite way. I think Oumar C might start this fight with real success with takedowns and top control, but I think Trocoli, the longer the fight goes on, the more I feel like he might find answers for C, especially if he's making C work and C's gas tanks dropping a little bit, then the takedowns don't be as successful going forwards. I just think it's a really, really well-matched fight. Stylistically, I think Trocoli is the better striker, Oumar C the better wrestler as well. It's the grappling that's the interesting factor. I think that Trocoli is going to have a level of grappling at least getting up to his feet, and then he's the better striker again. So it's a tough fight to really be massively confident in. I love Oumar C's style. I was going to bet him at plus 100 or even up to a slight favourite against Adolfo Bellato, but against Trocoli, I just think it's a tougher fight for him. So yeah, tough, close fight, really interesting stylistically. I think both fighters are going to have the moments. I am going to slide with Trocoli. I've just got a gut feeling that he's going to have the answers for C here. So I'm picking Antonio Trocoli to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Tamires Vidal versus Melissa Gatto. And Melissa Gatto stepping in on short notice here against Vidal. Melissa Gatto also supposed to fight Ducote a few weeks ago. That fight was cancelled. I can't remember all the ins and outs, but I think it was cancelled like after the weigh-ins. Maybe one of the fighters got ill. I don't even know if it was like a fight day cancellation where the broadcast announced it. I can't really remember, but I know that Gatto's supposed to have fought a few weeks ago. She didn't, so she's stepping in here. Even though it's short notice, she'll have still had a full fight camp not so long ago. She'll be in shape. She'll be prepared, ready to go. And I do think that short notice maybe provides a little bit of light for Tamires Vidal to beat her, but I do think it's a bit of a mismatch in regards to quality of fighter and where both fighters are at. The one thing that Vidal will have going for her here, and I always say this, it's the most difficult aspect to predict pre-fight in MMA, but I do think Vidal's going to have a physical advantage over Melissa Gatto. I think she's going to be a bit stronger, a bit more physical. So if she can get into these clinch positions where she's pinning Gatto up, I think that she might be able to get at her there. But if Vidal goes skill for skill with Gatto, whether that's striking or grappling, I just think Gatto's better. Gatto naturally a grappler. Wrestling probably could be a little bit better. I always say this with some, there's certain jiu-jitsu, real good jiu-jitsu fighters that, you would think would just absolutely smash the wrestling to death so they can get the fight down to the mat where they're good. But the thing is, Melissa Gatto does have a level of getting fights down, even though sometimes it's not traditional wrestling, it's a trip or working her way around to the back and then dragging her opponent down. And then once she's on the mat, that's where she's really, really good. She's really dangerous, good positionally. And even if she's on her back, she can hit sweeps and reversals. But her striking's improved as well over the last few fights. So now she's got a game where her striking's caught up to her grappling. And yeah, she's pretty comfortable wherever fights go. And I think that at this level in the UFC, she'll beat pretty much every fighter that she fights. When she's going to have problems is when she steps up in competition and starts fighting closer to the top 15. But with all due respect to Vidal, she's not there. She is that type of fighter at this type of UFC level that I think Gatto does really well against. And again, I see that being, a factor in this fight. Gatto, I think the striking, again, I don't think she's going to have as much power as Vidal, but I think she's going to be a better quality striker. And if this fight hits the mat, then I think Gatto's going to have a lot of success as well. So I think that Gatto, wherever this fight goes, should be absolutely fine. But if it does start hitting the mat, that's where she's going to look like the minus 400 favourite that she is. So for those reasons, I'm picking Melissa Gatto to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got an interesting fight here between two fighters on losing streaks at the minute. We've got Abus Magomedov versus Warlley Alves. Now, Abus Magomedov came into the UFC with a lot of hype around him, a quick finish in his UFC debut, and then he goes in there against Sean Strickland in the main event, and he does really well against Sean Strickland in that first round. We don't often see Sean Strickland, a little bit overwhelmed, maybe a little bit hurt as well, and not being able to really get his game going in any of the rounds that he fights. But Magomedov did a really good job in that first round. However, Magomedov also absolutely emptied the gas tank trying to finish Sean Strickland, who just, was not getting finished on that night. And then from that first round, Sean Strickland just absolutely took over. Magomedov, crumbled, caved, and Strickland got the finish. Then Magomedov goes in there against Caio Barrillo, and he loses the fight by decision. And again, it's one of them where, after the Sean Strickland fight, there were people thinking, well, can Magomedov go out of round one and perform? And look, yes, he lost the fight, but the fact that he got 3 rounds in it, under his belt, and a fighter like Caio Barrillo, look, if you're tiring out and crumbling and caving in, you're going to get finished by someone like Barrillo. He's a very, very good fighter. So there is still something there with Abus Magomedov. And the bottom line is, look, if Warlley Alves fought Sean Strickland and Caio Barrillo, he'd lose both of those fights as well. Then on the flip side, Warlley Alves, he's on a 3-fight losing streak. He lost to Ikram Aliskerov, which, would absolutely beat Magomedov as well. Aliskerov, I think, is one of these real underrated guys in the division in regards to, that name value. People don't really know who he is yet from the casual MMA fan base, but he's going to be one of them that grows in the division and starts to shine and starts to become a household name. And then the other fight that Warlley Alves lost was against Jeremiah Wells. Look, Jeremiah Wells just came into that fight. Round 1 was close. Round 2, he caught Warlley Alves and knocked him out. But like I said with Jeremiah Wells earlier on with the Carlston Harris breakdown, Jeremiah Wells is explosive and just packs power. And if he catches anybody, they're probably going to sleep. And he caught Warlley Alves. The one that I'm not going to give Warlley Alves a pass for is the Nicholas Dalby fight. I think that was a fight that Warlley Alves, if he's going to be beating a guy like Abus Magomedov, he should be beating Nicholas Dalby. And again, that's no disrespect to Dalby. Dalby's one of these, real veteran fighters that do provide a difficult fight for anybody because they're so well-rounded. But the thing is, I think Magomedov is a level above Nicholas Dalby. So the fact that Warlley Alves went close with Dalby and ended up losing, even if he was on the flip side of the split decision, he's still going to a very close fight with a fighter that I think is slightly lesser than the opponent he's got in front of him on Saturday night. I think Abus Magomedov, one of these fighters is going to come off this losing streak and get a win. And I just think Magomedov's the better quality fighter. I think he's a better striker, both technically with power as well. I think if Warlley Alves tries to get him down to the mat, I think it's going to be difficult. I think Magomedov can pop right back up. And yeah, look, even on the regional scene where Magomedov was taken down, he had the ability to get back up. And I don't think Warlley Alves has got the strongest wrestling either. If he can get Magomedov settled shoulder to shoulder and solidify a position where he's on top of him for 10-20 seconds with no scrambling going on, then yeah, Warlley Alves might be able to do some good work. But I just think Magomedov is better than that. And I do think it's a fight where we see the majority of the action take place on the feet, and that's where I think Magomedov's better in regards to being the better striker. So for those reasons, I'm picking Abus Magomedov to win this fight. And in the next fight, this could be a really low-key fun fight. We've got Piera Rodrigues versus Ariane Carnelossi. Now, Ariane Carnelossi's, I don't know where she's been for the last couple of years. I'm not sure whether she's been injured. I'm not sure whether she's took time off to, reset, improve, and come back better. But yeah, Carnelossi, it's a bit strange because she's a very, very physical fighter and she's got knockout power. And look, Piera Rodrigues is also quite physical and, she can also crack hard as well. What's interesting about both ladies here as well is that in the UFC, they're either fighting fighters that they absolutely should be beating or the fighting fighters that they're going to lose against. And the fighters that they should be beating, they're both winning. And the fighters where their opponents should be winning, so the fights where they should be losing, they're losing. So, and also their opponents that they're beating, each other I think would beat those opponents, and the opponents that they're losing against, each other would lose against those opponents as well. So it's a really interesting, from my perspective anyway, it's a really interesting dynamic in the fight, because I think that both fighters are really close in regards to the level where they're at, and B, the level of competition that they've been fighting. They've both been tested against better quality opponents. They've both been given fighters that they should be beaten and have taken out of there. So yeah, it's like I said, it's an interesting dynamic. Now, when you look at it like stylistically from a striking perspective, both of these are very boxing heavy. Like, both of them have got relative power. I think Carnelossi is probably going to be the more physical, maybe more stronger, the fighter with the slightly more power as well. But where I like Piera Rodrigues here is I think that she's got a second path to victory in regards to just being able to level change, take Carnelossi down, because I think her wrestling game is good. And look, Carnelossi is going to be able to get back up to her feet in some moments. I do think that she's got the ability to do that, but I think it's one of these fights, if Rodrigues keeps going back to the well, that, you know, it might get easier and easier the longer the fight goes on. The boxing here for me is going to be really, really like fun to watch. I think both fighters are going to bite down on the mouthpiece, swing hard, try and get each other out, especially Ariane Carnelossi. Like, she's very, very aggressive, you know, trusts that she's the fighter that can overwhelm her opponents, the bully in the cage, the bigger, more physical fighter. But I think Piera Rodrigues is the slightly more technical striker. Only slightly. I think Carnelossi's got the slight power edge. I think Rodrigues the slight technical edge. But with Rodrigues, she's got that level change in her if she needs to, and they're more likely to go down that route as well. So where the fight's going to be fun, where it's going to be close and competitive in moments, I kind of feel Rodrigues can just snatch a couple of rounds out of Carnelossi if the fight does go that long, of course. But I kind of feel that Rodrigues can just break things up a little bit, break the flow up, take a close round just by hitting a takedown and getting 20-30 seconds of top control. I do like the fact that Rodrigues can and will likely just mix things up a little bit more. So for those reasons, I'm picking Piera Rodrigues to win this fight. And in the next fight, this, again, talking of fun fights, I think this is going to be fun as well. We've got Alatengheili versus Kleydson Rodrigues. Now, Kleydson Rodrigues, really, really strange start to his UFC career, if I'm being honest, because, look, he came in at flyweight from the Contender Series. He absolutely battered his Contender Series opponent to the point where it was, you know, it wasn't like a round one knockout. It was 3 rounds where we got to see exactly what Rodrigues is like as a fighter. The dude is fast, he's powerful, mixes things up well with punches and kicks, beautiful combinations, can mix things up with his style as well, shooting takedowns, good grappling game. He looked like with the Contender Series, you're looking for potential, you know, contenders into the UFC that are going to rise to be prospects into the rankings, into the top 10, top 5, and he looked exactly like the type of fighter that the UFC wants to sign. Like, I was so high on this kid, and then he comes into the UFC. He has his debut against CJ Vergara. Vergara did, you know, have a tough first round against him, but ended up coming out of that first round and started to take over the fight a little bit. Rodrigues gassed a little bit, but it wasn't horrific from Rodrigues. He just, like I say, he tied a little bit. It was UFC debut. Maybe there was some debut jitters there, which we see all the time with these Contender Series fighters that come into the UFC for the first fight, and it just didn't go his way, and he was fighting a real dog in there in CJ Vergara. Like, CJ Vergara is a guy that's not going to give anybody an easy time. Like I say, just a real dog-like approach, and Kleydson Rodrigues succumbed to that, and you know, he did drop that. You can forgive that first loss in that way, coming off the Contender Series. So then in his next fight, the UFC put him in there with Shannon Ross. Now, Shannon Ross is a fighter that, you know, I think, again, no disrespect, I think that the UFC gave Rodrigues Shannon Ross as, again, a reset type of fight. Let's see what you're really about. Obviously, we've just given you a bit of a dog. This is a little bit of a step down in competition. Let's see how your performance is. And look, Kleydson Rodrigues looked absolutely phenomenal in there. He got Shannon Ross out of there in round 1 as well. Again, we saw glimpses of what we saw in the Contender Series, except, you know, it didn't go 3 rounds. But the negative light that was shone on Kleydson Rodrigues is he missed weight by a couple of pounds for that fight. So he came in heavy. Again, it can happen. You know, it's not professional, but, you know, most fighters in the career will miss weight at some point. So then he goes in there against Tatsuro Taira. So now the UFC are like, okay, you are what you are. We know what you're about. We've just seen that. Let's now test you against another one of our prospects. And I absolutely loved this fight. I loved that prospect fight. The problem is, Kleydson Rodrigues missed weight again, and the fight this time got cancelled. It didn't go ahead, so the UFC didn't get away with this one. So that's obviously not impressed the UFC. Kleydson Rodrigues moved up to bantamweight. Whether it was forced or not, I don't know, but I think it's the right decision. If you're missing weight twice in a row, you need to move up in weight. And then he fights his first bantamweight fight against Farid Basharat. Now, these Basharat brothers I've mentioned for a long time are just like super legit quality fighters that are going to be in and around the top of the division at some point in the career, and they'll take the losses along the way. Of course they will, unless you're named Khabib Nurmagomedov, you take losses in MMA. So he fights Farid Basharat, and again, Farid Basharat is going to be a tough fight for absolutely any fighter. And Rodrigues was finished in round one. You know, he didn't look bad to start with, but then he did get taken down, and once he was taken down, he didn't really have too many answers. And look, like I say, I'm trying not to make excuses for Kleydson Rodrigues, but the Basharat fight, I just don't think many fighters at this level are going to beat Basharat. CJ Vergara, his debut that he lost, again, I'll give him a pass for it being his debut. Shannon Ross, he was supposed to get him out of there in round one, and he absolutely did. So now this is a really well-matched fight with Alatengheili, and I've spent a lot of time on Kleydson Rodrigues just because I wanted to talk about that journey that he's had so far from when he was this prospect that everyone was massively high on, including myself. I am still really high on him. I'm still gonna look, if he goes out there against Alatengheili on Saturday night and he doesn't get the win, or even if it's close and it's like a split decision, I'm still not gonna drop my opinions on Kleydson Rodrigues. But if Alatengheili goes in there and just destroys him, either over 3 rounds or gets him out of there early, then obviously, you know, I've been wrong about where Kleydson Rodrigues is as a prospect. But Alatengheili is, in my opinion, a really good fight to see where Rodrigues is at, because he's a fighter that's got good boxing. He's got a wrestling background, although he doesn't use it too much in the UFC in the cage, but he'll use it when he needs to. His top game is okay, but again, he's more of a wrestler than he is a topside grappler. So I kind of feel like we've got a fight here that, look, if Alatengheili takes Rodrigues down, I think Rodrigues can get back up to his feet. I also think Rodrigues could take Alatengheili down and do good work on Alatengheili. It'll be harder for Rodrigues to take Alatengheili down, but if he does get him down, I think Rodrigues is going to be the better grappler. Then on the feet striking, I think that this is where Rodrigues can really shine, because Alatengheili will have a mixture of, you know, sitting, waiting patiently for his shots, and also mixing some aggression in there as well. So it'll bring out the best in Rodrigues, because we'll be able to see offensive work and defensive work as well because of the way Alatengheili strikes. And I think once Alatengheili allows Rodrigues to really start flourishing and opening up with his strikes, I think we're going to really see how good Kleydson Rodrigues is. I still believe like there's a really, really good prospect in there. And Alatengheili, what's going to help him here in making Rodrigues shine is that Alatengheili is tough and durable. So I don't think Rodrigues is just going to, you know, throw a flurry of strikes and get Alatengheili out of there. I think that Alatengheili's durability will hold up. He'll eat the strikes that he needs to eat, but it'll just allow Rodrigues' confidence to flow. It'll allow his striking to flow. And I think Alatengheili will try and start mixing things up with takedowns. But if Rodrigues is getting right back up to his feet and not getting settled on the mat, then again, we start striking again. And I just think that if this fight is won and lost on the feet striking, which I think there's a more, the likelihood is more that it ends, or it's determined via the striking than it is the wrestling and grappling. That's where I think Rodrigues is the slightly better fighter. That's where I think he'll flourish and just look better than Alatengheili on the night. So for those reasons, I'm picking Kleydson Rodrigues to win this fight. In the final fight to break down on this card, we've got Emily Ducote versus Vanessa Demopoulos. And I think that, look, Emily Ducote is a big favourite, or a relatively sized favourite in this fight. I think she's like minus 300, minus 350, and I do get it. But Vanessa Demopoulos is one of these fighters where she is a dog inside the cage. She can, you know, drag herself through really bad positions to start performing really well. And Ducote is not a real front runner, if that makes sense. So what I mean by that is she's not a fighter that will really take the fight by the scruff of the neck and start to, you know, dominate, pour a ton of volume on there and really start to to, dominate her opponent and make life really uncomfortable for her opponent. But on the flip side to that, Ducote is technically sound, so she'll probably make a fight closer than what it needs to be, but still be point scoring, still be outlanding, still doing the right things. And that's where I think the Demopoulos is going to be got at here. Demopoulos, I think, would have most success if she can get the fight down to the mat and she can, grapple with Ducote, but Ducote is going to be tough to take down. And I think every time Demopoulos closes the distance, I think Ducote can just, crack her, whether it's just a hard low kick or a stinging jab, just to stop that forward momentum, stop Demopoulos trying to set up takedowns. And then if it turns it into a point scoring striking fight, which I kind of think the fight is likely to head towards, then yeah, I think Ducote is going to get the better of Demopoulos in rounds that are close, but Ducote is, edged, not comfortably, but she's visibly edged, if that makes sense. A fighter can still win 30-27 with a fight being close. A fighter can still win comfortably with each round being close, because the rounds are scored individually. So if, Ducote is in a close round but is just edging it, is up by 10 strikes, so it's clear that Ducote is won in a close round, if that makes sense. I think it's going to be that type of fight. I'm picking Emily Ducote to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in, as always. I really do appreciate it. If you are on YouTube, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Please drop a comment as well. I do try and get back to all comments. There's also some funny comments and funny replies each week as well. And yeah, like I say, if you're on YouTube, please show us the support. If you're on one of the podcast platforms and you fancy coming over to YouTube just to have a chat, tell me where we disagree on the picks, tell me who you're betting, what you cashed last week, whatever you want to do, whatever you want to comment, I'll always try and get back. And yeah, as always, I appreciate the support. And remember, one final time, if you're wanting to jump into the action this weekend, then do so at MMA Play 365, where you get a little bit of everything in all-in-one subscription, whether that's the Base AI UFC prediction software or the handicapper advice. It's all in one package. Just choose either your one event, your monthly or your annual, and you're good to go. All in one place, and that's at MMAplay365.com. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again next week.